Usually they're screaming right when something like this first starts. Here we go. And we are live. There we are,
better
Scott.
for worse.
Look at that.
Look at that. We made it.
We're made it. We're in. This is the first episode of my Roadhouse. Usually it's
there's got to be a bit of a, I don't know, is there a story behind that? Is there dissension in the ranks with the other guys? Were they getting tired of your act? Were you getting tired of their act?
I think they're definitely getting tired.
Was somebody not pulling their weight? What's the story here?
Yeah, they're definitely probably getting tired of me. No, we're still doing the regular drink and draw each week.
Yeah.
but
you felt compelled that there wasn't enough Dan Panosian once a week with the guys. We need Dan Panosian twice a week with the guys, and then flying solo, so that we can see if it's, we can kind of see who's holding who back, right?
Exactly.
Who's destined to be the YouTube star and who's not.
I know. I might even have to put you out for a second just to, so I get more attention on my own show.
All right, I'll go have some dinner. You let me know. You can text me what I'm about when I'm ready to come back in.
Jeff is doing a show. It's called Another Round with Jeff Johnson. Dave has a Devil Pig Select. Joe Quesada, he may have his own show, but I think it's on like the Marvel YouTube. I'm not sure.
And I know this. I mean, the show, the Drink and Draw. I mean, it's a virtual version of what you guys would do. And I don't think I've ever been to one of your drink and draws, but I mean, you guys literally would go to establishments where they served alcohol, and you guys would have a good time, and you would drink and you would draw, hence the name. And then it's gone into this realm. And was it COVID that drove you to this, or were you doing it prior to that? I guess you were doing it prior to COVID.
We might have been doing it prior. Jeff Johnson moved away from LA, so we couldn't do the drink and draws like we used to. So we just decided this might be the best thing for us, so we could all still get together. I mean, the reason we started drink and draw originally was just so we could hang out and have an excuse to hang out. Our wives wouldn't complain as much.
Is it better or just different doing it virtually?
Well, I personally one of the reasons we started Drink and Draw was because, as artists, this is my whole world, is this
you're pretty isolated.
Yeah, so it's nice to get out into a social space where it's possible you might interact with other people other than the friends that you've invited or used to hanging out with. It's a bar and or tavern or whatever, a roadhouse. Hence the name here. Plus, I love that movie. I always got a kick out of it as a kid. Until the Roadhouse, IP owners come and ask me to take that down. It'll have to be changed.
It's coming. It is.
It'll definitely.
Nothing is free.
No, nothing's free here. I got a backup, Scott. Hopefully, let's see if you dig this one, just in case. Crom's Cantina.
I like that too.
But until then,
was there a lot of deliberation and debate on making the choice of, okay, what's it gonna be? Or maybe you could have it switch off each week, right? One week it's Roadhouse, one week it's Crom's Kitchen. Yeah,
Crom's Kitchen. I like that.
Yeah.
Well, the reason I wanted you to be the first guest is, I think anyone who knows any of my artwork knows I started just trying to copy and emulate your work. I was just blown away. I was in the Marvel offices. I think I was in Ralph Macchio's office when I first got to see originals. You were inking Will Spertatio on Legion of the Night. Yeah,
and you took over for that on that. As a matter of fact, that was one of our few sort of career crossovers. I did the first issue of Legion of Night. And I guess at that point you were just breaking in, and if you were just breaking in and you were given hey, you want to do issue 2 of Legion of Night? Holy crap! Talk about being thrown into the lion's den. That was some intense. That was some of Wilson's best work.
It was so cool.
I can imagine it being pretty intimidating.
Well, I hadn't really seen too many originals in my day, so when I got to Marvel, I was inking primarily with this brush marker that John Byrne used to talk about in the back of Fantastic Four. It was this Stadler Mars brush pen. And when I got to Marvel, I was like, oh my God, I have to start inking with a real brush. And so I learned to ink those couple of months with a real brush. And meanwhile, I was poring over those pages that would come in from Legion of the Night. And I had no idea how you achieved any of those lines. I didn't, I heard Terry Austin used a crow quill. I mean, it was things like that, and I think the only reason I got that job was because I was the only one studying it, and there was nobody else doing anything remotely close to what you guys were doing at Homage Studios.
So, well, when you say you guys, I mean, really, Wills was definitely, he took that. It's kind of funny. It's probably one of his more, I don't know if it's forgotten is the right way, but I mean, it's definitely one of his less seen or less remembered series. Probably because it only ran the 2 issues, and it was right around sort of like it was sort of sandwiched in between the Punisher, which was kind of a medium level gig at the time, and then the X-Men stuff, which came and X-Force, X-Factor, whichever one, X-Factor. Yeah. Which was obviously like his next level up, and then he did the X-Men run. But anyway, so I think partly just because of the brightness of those projects, kind of
overshadows out certainly.
Kind of a little bit. But that was I think that, and so that's why I'm saying what you had to deal with from a creative standpoint, from a getting thrown into the fire standpoint. You're inking somebody at a point where you're trying to figure things out, and you're inking somebody who's really, kind of either near or at the top of his game. I mean, he really kind of went all out on that stuff.
I mean, so much cross hatching, and I was at the entry level inking. Like if I could do feathering that came out nice, I was like applauding myself. So
right. Yeah,
cross hatching.
You really couldn't just be technical on that job. You had to like sort of understand lighting and volume and reflected lighting and transitions, and it's like,
I just kind of winged it, Scott, if I'm being honest. I mean, I had Xeroxes of your inks over them. I was just trying to replicate that sort of look.
But isn't that how we all start? I mean, I had pages of like Klaus Janson over Frank Miller taped to my drawing board those first few years, trying to replicate his line work, and fortunately I wasn't good at it, and I say fortunately because that's sort of how you get a style. You're trying to build off of what others do before you. I mean, comics and comic art or inking or drawing or whatever, there's really no point in inventing the wheel from scratch. You look at those who came before you and try to figure out what you like about it, what works and what doesn't work, and try to really absorb the science of it and the artistry of it and somehow make it your own. But I actually, it's kind of funny. I mean, you're talking about like trying to like do what I did on Legion of Night, and I'm trying to do what Klaus Janson or Terry Austin or Kevin Nolan or all my kind of artistic heroes. I'm trying to do them and doing a terrible job of it, but the result of that is my own voice starts to emerge and come forward.
Well, that's what's interesting, and I kind of wanted to get into, because when I first, even before that period, I was, again, they threw me into the fire with this one. I think I was working with Carl Potts, and they had Mark Farmer jumped off of Alien Legion. He was inking Larry Stroman, and I don't know if you remember those pencils, but
God, that stuff was great. Are you kidding?
Yeah,
I love that stuff. Yeah.
They, like today, you wouldn't ink those. You'd probably just scan those pencils because they're very lush. It's almost like Gene Colan in a way, where there's an illustrative sort of line that he had that was it was just like the pencil was like butter on those pages.
And we're getting off on it. We get off on a tangent on this, but I have to say, like, every time someone brings up Larry Stroman, he's another guy that, I mean, nobody draws like Larry, right? Nobody at that time drew like Larry. I mean, we're all we're all students of those who came before us. And I know he had influences, and I've talked to him about
Must
it,
have.
but it's like, but the influences are not obvious at all. It's
I
like
would never know what his influences
this
are.
completely unique vision came out of absolutely nowhere.
Yeah.
And that kind of creativity and that kind of unique artistic voice is remarkable and rare,
Yeah.
and should be kind of be celebrated. But anyway,
I know
sorry.
that was amazing stuff. But I was in that office, and I guess the long point I was trying to make was, struggling on that stuff to follow Mark Farmer and doing a horrible job. My dad used to look at the pages and go, "Oh my God," like feeling bad for Larry, because I showed him what Mark Farmer had done. But
Right.
at that time, I think Jim Lee was drawing Punisher War Journal, or it was but
Sounds about right.
It looked nothing like the X-Men stuff. And I think even Carl might have been laying out those issues.
I think especially on the earlier issues, and maybe throughout most of it, Carl was laying it out, and then I think Jim did the finished pencils and inked bunches of it. I inked a couple of the issues too, and then Jim would have some other inkers occasionally. Either I don't know if Carl inked any of that stuff. I know like Klaus Janson inked an issue. I think a couple other, I think Al Milgrom might have inked an issue or two.
Yeah.
But yeah, it definitely had a different look, which again is kind of par for the course because Jim was a new young.
Then.
Yeah, absolutely. And so the stuff on Punisher War Journal didn't look anything like the stuff Jim was doing on Alpha Flight, and consequently, it didn't look like what he eventually started doing on X-Men. It was an obvious evolution.
You guys were all kind of sharing a studio together, so you weren't always working with Jim at that point, but you were probably working more with Wills.
No, because Wills was inking Jim on Alpha Flight, and then so we became friends, and we would like hook up at like a convention or at San Diego or whatever. And it wasn't until a year or two later where we started making inroads into the X-Men office and Bob Harris's office, and we started doing some fill-ins on X-Men and realizing we kind of had a good thing going. And then the idea is like, hey, maybe we should, form a studio. There's strength in numbers. We sort of all get along. We all have a pretty similar view of what makes for cool art or a great looking, approach to doing comics kind of our way. We all kind of had the same artistic heroes, so it made sense. But yeah, the Punisher War Journal stuff, we were all still separate. Wills Portasio and I, we were living in San Diego at the time, so we would work together. Either at my place or at his place or whatever, but not every day, and not as a formal studio. And it wasn't until we asked Jim to come down that it became like Homage Studios.
And then it grew into something incredible, and it kind of
worked. I mean,
it's a legendary studio.
It did work. I mean, I think. Plus, we all started at roughly the same time. I think Wills was a little before me, and then I was a little before Jim. But it's kind of like we all kind of got going at the same time and the same trajectory and the same goals. Very ambitious. You could see progression of skills. You could see a progression of style. That sort of we kind of mirrored each other. We pushed each other. That's one of the advantages and beauties of working in studio style is you have people there that push you. And I've mentioned it before. It's not like it's not cutthroat. It's not, there's no evil intent. It's basically you're seeing what the guy next to you is drawing or inking, and you go, damn, that's good. I have to step up my game. Yeah. And I am so impressed by what I'm seeing Jim do or what Wills is doing. I want to impress them as well. So what I'm doing right now is fine. It's professional, but how do I raise my game to impress them as well? And if I'm impressing them, then I'm probably impressing my editors. I'm hopefully impressing the audience, so it's a very healthy, competitive spirit. I could sort of see scenarios where studios could get a little out of balance. And
I think you guys all had, it sounds like you all had the same goal in mind, and you recognize that all of you were pushing each other. So
Yeah.
you had something very special there.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know what I got a kick out of on those Legion pages, and I'd inked a handful of different smaller projects at Marvel before I got those. Not too many. I've been there less than a year, but it was the first time I saw fully inked drawings on the backs of pages.
Back of the pages, yeah.
And I'm like, this guy Wills loves drawing. I mean, I was like, because once you start working professionally, it's hard to just sit around with a sketchbook, and just go around because you have deadlines. And it'd be great drawings on the back of pages. And I hadn't seen that.
Trust me, there were times, especially especially on Punisher, because he was still kind of figuring things. We're always trying to figure things out, but he was still really trying to figure things out. And I remember, we'd get the originals back, and we'd have to decide, are we selling these originals, to make a couple extra bucks? Because as you know, when you're in comics, you don't really make any legitimate money. You sell originals as part of the business model. But I would get, we'd split up pages. And because we were in the same studio at the same time, we wouldn't have to wait for Marvel to split it up for us. We would split it up ourselves. And half the time I'd pick pages because of what was on the back of the pages more than like what was on the front, because
I can believe it.
Because when he's drawing something on the front, when he's drawing part of the story, it's being dictated by what the writer wants. It's being dictated by deadline, right? So sometimes those are at cross purposes, and sometimes it's like, near the back end of the deadline, and you're running out of gas, you're running on fumes. It may not be your absolute best work, but the stuff that he's doing on the back, that's kind of like, I've got a moment to breathe. I've got some free time. I want to figure out how to do, the Punisher, emblem just right from a certain angle with a certain lighting, shot or whatever. And those would be more interesting. They'd be probably very often they'd be better artistically, and be interesting from a creative state. You get to see the kind of the process. If you're an artist, process, and then he'd ink himself. He was actually, speaking of Wills in particular, he was actually very happy, though, I think, to let go of the inking thing, right? The inking was, a means to an end. Early on, when he got in, he started off inking Art Adams on Long Shot, and he was doing Chris Warner on Alien Legion, and that's when he brought me in as an assistant for both of those books. But I think real early on, I think he saw inking as being tedious, technical, a little bit stifling. I think he wanted to sort of, and Wills is another guy. I mean, talk about Larry Stroman. I think Wills has a very unique artistic voice.
Oh yeah,
nobody else looked like him, especially at the time. I've seen occasionally, people kind of borrow things from him over time, but at the time that Wills was doing, that work, nobody looked like Wills. And I know what all his references were. I know all the artists that he looked at, but by the time it's got synthesized and came out of his drawing, pencil, it looked uniquely Wills.
Yeah, but one of a kind.
But I know that inking specifically, especially inking other people, was not really. I think it had a novelty, like maybe in the first year, and by year two, it was like, I need to draw my own stuff, which is where we diverged. I mean, I was pretty happy inking, and continued ink, for years and years, and he eventually is like, nope, that's not for me, and not only was it not for him, but other than the back of the pages, he eventually started using other inkers like myself and whatnot. So yeah,
those guys had you were only inking Wilson Jim at that point for them. Once things got rolling on.
No, there was other odd. I mean, there's a bunch of odds and ends. I mean, I would ink like Mark Texiera on a Punisher annual, or I would ink. Actually, right about the same time we were doing the Legion of Night stuff, I was inking Jackson Geis, Butch Geis, whatever name you want to use, on the Deathlock mini series. It was like a prestige format book, and that was actually pretty cool because that was Geis's breakdowns, and I would do all the finished ink. So I would add all the shadows, I would add all the detail and stuff. That was pretty cool.
What about Strikeforce Moratori?
Strikeforce Moratori over Brent Anderson. That was my first sort of regular gig. That was a great great thing to learn off of, because Brent came from kind of the Neil Adams school of, his stuff had a kind of a Neil Adams-y vibe, and I was huge, and am a huge Neil Adams fan. Would have loved nothing more than to draw and ink like Neil Adams at back then. So we were, again, that was a good pairing. That was also Carl Potts, by the way.
I remember you drew the last issue, right?
I didn't draw the last issue. I drew like a random issue. It was like issue 17. It was like right in the middle of the story.
I was just going to say that, Scott. That's how much of a geek I am. I was going to go issue 17. I think that's when I picked up the book very first time.
And it's one of the. Don't make it sound like it's one of many peppered pencil jobs that I've done throughout my career. I haven't told a whole lot of stories in comics. I've done a lot of pinups and covers and odds and ends here and there, but not a whole lot of storytelling. And that was one of them. That was fun. It was, again, good learning experience. And again, it was something that I think it was a fairly low profile book, that Strikeforce Morituri. Oh, look at that. I'm seeing something slightly more recent there. But it was a fun way to kind of dip my toes into the storytelling and penciling era.
Mm-hmm. You must have done this during COVID here.
I did. That was a charity thing for Jim. Remember when Jim was doing all those great drawings that were for the comic stores? It was like he was doing like auctions. He was doing auctions on eBay, and he would be getting like guest artists to draw pieces that would be auctioned and sold for charity. And that Wolverine standing there with all the ninjas behind him, that was my contribution.
That was beautiful piece. Someone got lucky.
Any excuse to draw ninjas, right?
Yeah, I've done it too. I mean,
well, the same thing with the other drawing that you just showed, the cover that was I guess it was the X-Men Legends cover with all the ninjas. That was one that I fooled myself in that. Okay, I'm going to have Wolverine fighting Lady Man. I had certain requests from the editors. There had to be Omega Red, there had to be Lady Mandarin, there had to be Wolverine, and I think they wanted Jubilee in there as well. But they said, but Jubilee is an option, is optional. And I said, okay, fine. And I didn't squeeze her in. But then I said, I'm going to put in a bunch of like ninjas. Okay, cool. And I thought because they're all in kind of like black costumes, I could just sort of like fake my way through it. I wouldn't actually have to draw each individual ninja. I could just sort of like do like a mass blob of eye slits and swords and some stripes, or the bands around the arms and stuff to kind of carve out the form. But I wouldn't really have to like work it all out. And then when I started getting into it, it's like, oh crap, actually I have to work all these guys out.
Look at them all.
They're sort of the weak link, because up till the bitter end I kept thinking, isn't there a way I can cheat this? Isn't there a way I can just kind of like make this an abstract shape without actually literally having to draw these damn ninjas? And like,
here's even more.
Nope. Yeah, there's even more. There's more ninjas. Thank you, Frank. Thank you, Frank Miller, for bringing ninjas to American comics. Right?
Yeah, really. I mean, I did a Logan cover like that where it was just an excuse for me to draw ninjas, and I just drew a ton of them.
Well, they're fun. I mean, they're fun, and I should have looked at it as an opportunity to draw a bunch of like cool ninjas, and instead of like, I'm gonna figure out how to cheat this, and I never did. It never worked out. I had to draw all the ninjas.
I was checking out this stuff.
Oh yeah, that's John Buscema. I was going to do, you're talking about like who else have I worked on? I was going to do a whole series with John Buscema. This was, again, probably about 1989 or 90.
Mm-hmm.
And I think this was just promo art for the series, and I think it was called Marvel Superheroes, and I don't even remember who was writing it. And I was like, oh, cool, I get to ink John Buscema. Okay, great. And then I think X-Men started happening, and I honestly don't remember if book just didn't happen. I assume the book didn't happen, and if I just kind of bailed because X-Men was clearly. I think we all kind of had like kind of short-term career goals, and at that time, X-Men was the biggest book in the land. And if you could somehow get onto X-Men, it would be beneficial from a career standpoint. And I loved X-Men anyway, so it certainly wasn't like pulling.
Yeah, I was a big fan.
So being able to pull an X-Men book and to have it be, one of my regular gigs. It's like something had to go. And I can't believe I'm saying it, but it's like, sorry, John Buscema, I can't ink you. I gotta ink this new guy, Jim Lee, on X-Men. But it is what it is.
When did you guys start change? Because you mentioned a little bit about the reflective lighting, and there's a little bit of, there's so much work to pull up, but you can see underneath like Wolverine's pectoral muscles where the light is coming up, and then
that's all Wills. I mean, so that was part of the studio influence, and I shouldn't say it was all Wills. Jim, as everybody knows, and even back then, was getting not only his structure dialed in, but he was learning lighting and lighting techniques and double lighting and triple lighting and the whole 9 yards. So he certainly understood the principles, but Wills definitely, whether it was on the Legion of Night stuff that you did and then onto the X books as well, he was really kind of perfecting that kind of the triple lighting with the reflected lighting coming like a bounce light coming off the ground, and then sort of up shadowing
crazy lighting
with core shadows on pecs and things, and it was so evocative, and I don't think anyone had really done it quite like that. I mean, again, the Neil Adams of the world and the Bernie Wrightsons and the Kevin Nolans and the guys who really used lighting to their advantage, they did their versions of it, their variations of it, but Will's kind of had his own little deal. And we're not idiots. We're seeing him draw this stuff. We're going, holy shit, look at this. This is great. Yeah. We got to steal this.
It influenced so many X-Men. There's so many X-Men artists after you guys left and went and formed Image. That was the house style. So you had big names like the Kuberts both doing that uplighting on every. That reflective lighting.
To some extent, it probably became fairly synonymous with at least a brief period there in the 90s, right? There had to be a couple of years where it was just sort of the go-to, like, or one of the go-to sort of approaches that you would take for certain situations. And again, I think a lot, I mean, whether how much of it was Jim, how much of it was Wills, how much of it was me, I think it was definitely the three of us together. But if you had to put a gun to my head, a lot of that was Wills, kind of bringing his own very unique sensibility and aesthetic, and us looking at it and just kind of going, okay, we need to steal that and borrow it and make it our own.
And then it seems like now there's considerable less of that. It's more traditional lighting that you and Jim work on. So something changed.
Yeah, some of that's a change, and it's just a progression in our own personal aesthetics. It's a progression of the types of tools that I use, particular from an inking standpoint.
So what do you ink?
I think there's always a tendency to go. I hate to use the word simpler, because if you look at a lot of the stuff we're doing right now, it's not really simple.
Not at all.
But no. I think a lot of that kind of double lighting and reflected lighting and stuff, there's a little bit of a kind of a, look at me kind of flash element. It really kind of draws your eye a little bit. And everything that we were drawing and inking back then, we really wanted people to, notice it, for better or for worse. We wanted to be noticed. So you'd figure out every little trick you could come up with to kind of, attract the eye of the reader, of the editors, of your fellow professionals or whatnot. I think we're a little more kind of straightforward, maybe. I mean, there's still some flash. There's still, I mean, you don't want to have a drawing. You don't want to put out a drawing and have it be completely ignorable. You want to bring something to the table.
Yeah. For instance, like the straight leg on Moon Knight there, it's not all in shadow. You can see some of the shin and,
so I think maybe we're a little more selective, right? In other words, we won't overuse a technique or an attention grabbing device to the extent that we did back then. Maybe we're a little more thoughtful in terms of picking and choosing our times to use those types of techniques, which is, I think, what you should be doing. You should be thinking about what it is you're doing, what you're trying to accomplish. Don't just go on autopilot. Have a reason for what you're trying to do, and use it to your advantage. But don't just do it reflexively or as well, that's my style, so I have to do it all the time. It's like, no, you can actually kind of mix and match and change things up. You don't have to always do the same.
No, totally. I was looking at some of the I always
John
wanted to
Byrne.
ink John Byrne. I inked him
Yeah.
on one test page at Marvel. He didn't like it, and
Yeah.
it was
I
for
think
Spider-Man
he's
stuff.
pretty picky about
Oh no, he's real picky.
his inks. Um,
But I love
and
this.
this was me, like, this is pretty recent. This was a commission, and this was
Yeah,
me kind of doing my own thing, but certainly having, the memory of Terry Austin in my mind,
yeah,
and realizing that when it comes to Burn, no matter what actual line you put down, if it's really sharp and it's really clean, it's
yeah.
probably going to work. And I don't usually think like that. I know I'm
Mhm.
probably thought of as a fairly clean inker and a fairly clean artist, but that's not really my goal, per
Mhm.
se. I'm just trying to enhance the drawing, and if it comes out with a certain amount of polish or with a certain amount of grit, it's it's calculated. Whereas with this was definitely calculated to, like, okay,
Uh-huh.
I'm not going to do Terry Austin lines exactly, but I'm going to kind of keep it pretty polished and spit shine, because it works so well with John Byrne, what Terry Austin would do it. And I learned, Terry Austin's line is not someone who I tried to emulate. What I got from Terry was, I think in some ways, he might have been like the first kind of superstar inker that I can think of. There were certainly great inkers that came before him. I mean, Joe Sennett
Yeah.
for
Klaus.
decades,
Yeah.
and Klaus as well,
Mhm.
especially Terry. But I kind of consider, from an era standpoint, sort of Terry Austin and Klaus Janson to kind of be like 1A and 1B, and you pick which is
Yeah.
which of an era where it was so noticeable. Um, and with Klaus, I actually did try to steal his line. I tried to figure out how to be Klaus Jr. His work spoke to me in such a way that it's like, if I could ink like Klaus, life would be happy, and and the birds would be singing, and there would
Yeah.
be rainbows, over every
Mhm.
hillside. With Terry, what I got from Terry wasn't his line as much as, at that point, when he'd been doing, Burn on X-Men and inking George Perez on various projects and covers for Marvel, and Michael Golden and Art Adams, and his stuff, he never took a day off. The stuff was always at a super high level. You
Yeah.
couldn't find Terry Austin pages where you go, oh, the deadline must have hit, right?
Yeah.
There was a consistency in quality
Mhm.
that was kind of unmatched. And it's something that I noticed, because even all my favorite artists, I mean, I was a big, Bernie Wrightson fan, and Neil Adams fan, and John Buscema fan, and Jack Kirby fan, and all their work was you know the best of the best. But a lot of times you could sort of tell when the issues
Yeah,
were
they
just
were
trying to
when they
squeak in
were
under the
trying to get on.
deadline. Yeah, there would be
Mhm.
and it would just be like a random page here and there. But Terry was just from a principle standpoint. It didn't matter if just Terry had been a penciler or an inker or a colorist or whatever. There was just something that it kind of just, at the time, at a very formative time in my career, when I'm really trying to figure things out, one of the things that Terry sort of taught me was always do your best. Now, obviously,
Mhm.
these are monthly books. Usually, things have to get in, under the deadline. It's a hugely important part of the process. But that said, as much as humanly possible, don't put crap out there,
Yeah.
because not only are you not making yourself happy, but you're probably not making the readers happy. You're not making the editors happy. And I felt like if I could keep my batting average really high to do my best work, at least the best that I was capable of at that time, that good things would follow. I would be hired. The books would be bought. Pencilers wouldn't get pissed off at me for hacking and banging out work. I mean, I know that there were, frankly, inkers, pencilers who had careers that lasted some period of time, but they were the guys that were kind of brought in at the last minute, and the
Mhm.
deadline sucked, and they got a lot of work because they were able to put out product in time. But over the long haul, I think it hurt them, because
Yeah,
They
I
were
think it is
thought of
too.
as like kind of hacks. And then you would see them like rarely, like occasionally you would, and I'm not going to name it, but you'd see like jobs where they had plenty of time and you go,
Yeah.
oh, they're actually good. But
Mhm.
this is what it looks like when they're given some time. But they kind of pigeonholed themselves into accepting all these like last minute, you know, bail me
Yeah.
out jobs that
I
editors would
never
throw
really
their
had that
way.
happen with me either. I was very fast. I'm still very fast. So I
Yes,
would
you
ink
are. We
sometimes.
hate you for it.
I would ink like a couple of books a month. And I didn't have assistants or anything. I would just
Yeah,
work like crazy. But I knew I was starting to get pickup jobs. I was getting like, oh, we know he's fast, so he can
right.
do that book, or this penciler's late, and like, quality would suffer. But I too was like, man, I was so influenced by Terry Austin. It was for me, it was all as a young kid. It was very much all Terry Austin, and then you kind of ruined that for me because then I saw Ralph Macchio showed me those pages, and I was like, wow, I just couldn't handle it. But
Well, you
um,
clearly you could, and you
well,
did.
I think eventually I kind of semi got it, maybe a little bit, but I remember seeing Alex Garner, his
Alex
approach.
Garner is a great example.
Yeah,
Alex Garner is a
and I
great
really
example.
liked what he did, and I thought
Yeah,
it wasn't quite you, but it was a little bit of you
yeah,
and Terry Austin. And I was like, if in a perfect world, that would have been me.
right.
Like I would have loved to have inked like Alex Garner. But
Well,
I
Alex
had a
Garner
lot of
would have.
Klaus Janson, and I used a lot of brush.
Yeah,
So
and Alex Garner would have been like sort of the in my mind he was always kind of like the Terry Austin heir apprentice. The
mhm.
guy. No, what's the word up there? He would have carried on the legacy of Terry Austin. Let's put it that way, from the
Yeah.
standpoint that he was incredibly clean. But
Oh,
I don't know about you, but a lot of the really clean artists and inkers and whatnot, it kind of leaves you a little bit cold. There's not a lot of passion in it.
mhm.
There's not a lot of soul. Um, he, Alex Garner was one of those guys that could do a really clean line, but somehow it still had life, it still had
Well, it had
energy.
balance.
There was a bounce to the line.
Yeah.
He knew how to use line weights, but at the end of the day, really, what it came down to is he knew how to draw. Now,
Yeah. No,
his
as
his his
evidence
main
today.
his main assignment was inking, but
Mhm.
without fail, all the better inkers can draw like relatively well. And there's frankly, especially when we were getting in, there were very few there were very few artists who became inkers that couldn't draw, and there was usually
Mhm.
something that they were missing. There was
Yeah.
some something that was difficult for
Maybe they were
them,
slow.
whether it's speed or
Yeah.
you know
Yeah. Alex.
collaboration, all kinds of things. But Alex was definitely like one of those
Well,
guys
Alex
that
had
could
that thing
do
that
like
Terry had, which was like every page that Terry Austin inked looked
yeah,
like what a fun page. Like
right,
there was something very fun. And I remember reading this somewhere that Jim Shooter would say, and this is back when like we always think that the comics never sold great, but back in the day, like they did sell really really well, and comic books still sell very well. Sales are actually surprisingly increasing each year. But Jim Shooter said if they put Terry Austin on a cover, like inking someone else, it would jump 30,000
yeah.
copies,
That's what
which
I'm
is
saying. I
insane.
do think he was kind of
Yeah,
like one of the early, you know, superstar inkers. I
yeah,
think someone like Terry Austin could actually affect sales.
it could, and
And
I
I
don't think necessarily young fans 100%. I mean, I did because I was a super fan. Like
yeah,
I just love that style, but I think in general, you can't imagine everybody's
no,
knows who Terry is. They just looked
no,
at it and go, "That's
yeah,
cool. I like
right.
that."
Right.
You
It was
know?
very cutting edge at the time. And,
Yeah.
in some ways he was kind of ahead of his time in that it was very modern looking back then, and it still translates well today too. It's not it doesn't have it doesn't look dated, it doesn't look past shelf life kind of a look. I mean, so I think that was kind
Right.
of a universal quality to his work that translated into, the fans just eating that stuff up.
Yeah. So what would you say? Like, so I heard a rumor, and this is something
It must be
sadly,
true.
well, it has to be true, Scott. Well,
Right.
because your ears are probably always buzzing, but I'll always mention you as far as when it comes to inking and developing that image kind of look, the X-Men image look that kind of defined the '90s. Um, and somewhere I read or I heard that it was like an amalgamate where you saw a Gil Kane issue, and it was inked by Klaus Janson, and that kind of influence, and maybe a little bit of Barry Windsor Smith as far as the cross hatching, and that kind of influenced that inking approach. I don't know if that's anywhere near
no,
true.
I don't think so much that, but definitely there's some Barry Windsor Smith in the approach that we used for kind of that era's defining style. And some of that was, you know, from a timing standpoint, when we were getting rolling on the X-Men stuff,
Like Weapon X.
Barry Windsor Smith was doing Weapon X, and we were like hugely influenced. We all, in fact, kind of like how you were talking, being up at the offices looking at the Legion of Night stuff, we were looking at the Weapon X stuff. We'd go up to the Marvel offices, and the originals would be there, and you'd really be able to kind of just take it in and absorb it, and it just left a huge impression on all of us. So you can definitely see sort of the entrance of the Barry Windsor Smith line into the work that we were doing. The Klaus stuff and Gil Kane, I have quoted many times that Klaus is my favorite Gil Kane inker. And because Klaus was such a huge influence on me, and I tried for years to do Klaus, you could extrapolate that work informed the later work that we did during the X-Men years, but it wasn't anything specific that I was trying to bring to the table as Gil Kane and Klaus Janson during that period. A lot of the stuff that I was sort of sneaking in there that nobody ever like sees or makes reference to is some of the mid 80s P. Craig Russell ink line. There's a bunch of little kind of tricks that he used that I kind of borrowed.
Interesting.
Yeah.
What about the famous Z line?
So that's just kind of like me with a failed attempt. As clean as my work tended to be, I would get accolades for being clean. I don't really wear that as a badge of honor. Being clean, I get a lot of compliments from fans, and I know it's coming from a good place. They'll say, "God, that stuff is so clean." And it's like, great, thank you very much. And I appreciate it. I always appreciate where it comes from. To me, being as an inker specifically, there's no other application, but from an inking standpoint, being clean is actually the easiest thing you can do. It's just muscle memory. It's like repetition, and if you do it enough times, you're gonna be able to like start throwing parallel lines. They'll all like be perfectly parallel. They'll all have a nice pointed end. It's not really that hard. It's muscle memory. It's like grooving your golf stroke or your tennis stroke. You do it enough times. That's not the hard part. The hard part is to apply it in a way that enhances the drawing, that informs the turn
shape.
of a shape, that is still true to whatever the penciler's intentions are, that has perhaps has just from a calligraphic standpoint has a nice quality to it, but the desire or act of inking clean lines is like probably the farthest down on my list of goals that could possibly be. But I think if you're not an artist, I think it's probably the most impressive looking thing when you see like these really like polished, clean, and the guys who do it really well, like the Terry Austins and the Alex Garners of the world, they make it look easy, and yet it's still beautiful.
Yeah. John Beatty is another one.
Yeah, to behold.
Yeah.
But that was never a goal.
Well, what's interesting that you brought that up is I remember, and Scott, I studied this stuff, and if you had ever gone down to the Extreme Studios offices, I shared a studio, and we had humongous, and we would just keep Xeroxing these things up. Like we put 200% large, 200% large, just cross hatching. It was like a studio of madness, and we got kind of carried away with it and just had fun with it. But they're beautiful lines. But I think what people, inkers specifically, would do is, because virtually every single inker at that point, for the most part, was trying to emulate that style that you guys had created. And you're coming at it from a very maybe even scientific standpoint, like, well, there's a distance thing, and
right, you're trying to figure out like the angles of the cross hatching and create everything pattern, and how can you
and so what I kept noticing was like, well, there's just a boldness that some people aren't seeing. Like there's a dynamic in line variation that is missing in a lot of these inks from people. And it was like some go to very, very thin. And I think that's probably the Klaus influence. It's like that thin razor sharp line next to this almost outrageously, bold line. And that sort of thing
That's Klaus.
creates surprises. And if you expect the same thing every single time when you look at a drawing, eventually you're going to go, I guess maybe that's not true. Like if you enjoy drinking Coca-Cola, you're never switching to Pepsi. But
right.
I think seeing something that a spontaneous line or approach to inking, I think that sometimes excites people. And your work always had that excitement. It's probably the fact that you factored in the brushwork with it, along with it.
Probably, and probably wouldn't. Well, maybe it would surprise you. And I'll circle back around because you're asking me about like the little wiggle things. And what I didn't finish explaining was that was initially an attempt for me to be more spontaneous, because even at the time I was realizing that my stuff could sometimes have a little bit of a sterile look. It would be a little too clean to my liking. So I try to figure out little ways, subtle little ways, just to kind of like throw a monkey wrench into it. So that it would, so if you're thinking I'm going to go left, maybe I'll go right just a little bit. I'll zig when I mean, however much you want to like compare artwork to music, I always thought of, the perfect inker has a little bit of jazz in them. And if you really put a gun to my head, I had at least a couple of years where I wanted to be Bill Sienkiewicz so bad. I mean, leave all the other, stuff behind, with the Klaus and the Terry Austin and the Jim Lee, and I really wanted to be Bill Sienkiewicz because there was such a beautiful spontaneity. There was such a willingness and a boldness to just riff, and to be spontaneous
and change and diversity in his work. I see on Twitter you'll like repost like work of his, and it's always inspiring. He has a it's amazing just to have in the background. He has a YouTube channel, and very well done. Like, and he'll put like a little spotlight on whatever project he had worked on in the past, and you get to see this imagery. And it's all, I mean, anyone who knows Bill's work, it's all over the place, like from very black and white to crazy color to he's out of control.
Well, and this is where you start to sort of like discern the difference between what I was doing and then a master like Bill Sienkiewicz. And then I start doing like these really kind of random, like kind of loose wiggle type of ciphers. But eventually I kind of start to rein it in, and it started becoming a little bit more automatic. It became less spontaneous. It became just a trick in my tool bag, as opposed to, so it'd sort of be like a fake spontaneity, right? Whereas when Bill does like weird stuff, you can just tell he's just letting it fly. There's a fearlessness to it. It's I mean, to whatever extent something comes out of your artistic soul, the stuff is just erupting out of his imagination, and it feels right. And I would always just be and that's, we all have our own sort of doubts and insecurities. My doubt and insecurity is always like, I'm just too self-controlled. I'm too contained. I try to like break out from time to time, but in some ways it does take a certain amount of fearlessness. It does take a willingness to alienate your fan base, because once you sort of kind of get pigeonholed as a certain sort of style and aesthetic, you run the risk of alienating fans, and you hear the universal, I like your older stuff better.
I don't hear that too much, by the way.
and you're a great example of someone who evolved from the standpoint that you really were a student of your influences, and especially at first you had an extremely clean line, and now I'm like so jealous of your fearlessness, of the line you put down. It is spontaneous. There's still a certain level of control from the standpoint that you don't let the drawing get away from you. The drawing is the ultimate arbiter of what you're trying to convey, but you have no fear when it comes to putting down a line. It does not have to be a pretty line. A lot of times it is pretty, and a lot of times the rougher the line is, the prettier it is to me, because I know that it's coming from that place, from that vision, that artistic soul that is putting a line down quickly, but it's still conveying the information that you're trying to put out there. And that's to me the best of all worlds.
I think that's from years and years of trying to be precise and then letting myself go a little bit.
Yeah.
Dave Johnson, I had shown him some covers I was doing for Irredeemable on the Mark Waid and Peter Krause book from Boom, and I was going, what's wrong with this cover? And he goes, it's too controlled. The inking's too controlled. He goes, you love Sergio, Toby, like, why don't you try something like that? And I had done little things like that, and my sketches were at Drink and Draw were getting a little bit, and maybe it's the drink, who knows, but they were getting a little bit more spontaneous. And Dave said one day, so I like the Drink and Draw stuff better than your regular stuff, and it really kind of gave me the courage to well, maybe other people would like that too, because I enjoy doing that. I'll never be as free as, like, say, someone like Tony Salmons or Sienkiewicz, who could virtually make any line. It's the right line, but I'm always trying to let go.
Haven't you found when you, with so many friends that you got who are artists, and you maybe keep it to yourself, but I know a bunch of people, their sketchbooks are so much better than their more polished published work, because they're being spontaneous. They are embracing their happy accidents, and part of me wants to tell them, you see all these happy accidents here, incorporate that into your work, right? There's a liveliness to this. There's an immediacy. It speaks to me, like, so quickly and so beautifully, and yet then they go where they're going to be earning the money. And I suppose there could be fear involved in that. The editor is expecting a certain thing, or they think the fans are expecting a certain thing. But if they would just try to figure out a happy medium where like you did at the Drink and Draw, you found a voice there that was a little different than what your published work was. You tried to sort of like embrace it and make it part of your repertoire. And there's a lot of guys who I look at their sketchbooks and, oh, please, if you would just do more of that, I think it would open up. I think and you don't have to stay there. You don't have to like live there all the time, but try dropping that kind of stuff in. And
someone like Frank Miller is a perfect example, who probably follows his whim, in going in different directions, and to great success from So people, you could argue which you like better, is Sin City or Daredevil or Batman. It's it's insane. They're all different looks. Ronin is a different look.
Well, he's a great example of someone whose evolutionary paths. I always thought he was, and I don't think it was. I've never asked him if it was like a conscious decision to do this in a way that brings his fans along with him, but he did. He managed as he progressed from the Daredevil, and as he evolved from the Daredevil to the Ronin to the Dark Knight to the Sin City to the 300. I mean, there was, and this is over the course of 2-3 decades, there was this constant progression that was probably spontaneous, where he's just basically following his muse, but it was effective enough and subtle enough that people could sort of follow along with him, so that every time is like, oh, this is the next incarnation of Frank Miller, and it's just as cool as the last one, but it's just different. He's trying some different things, and it's to be brave and to just be willing to follow your muse is it's kind of a superpower that I think more artists should probably tap into. My stuff looks very different than it did. And I think we all evolve. My stuff looks very different. My inks look different. My drawing looks different. I don't, and I don't see that as being like, oh, look at me, I'm special. I think most artists evolve over time. It's just interesting to see like what directions people decide to kind of, let their evolutions, follow. What directions did they go?
for sure. Who
And
do you
obviously
think?
on some of the stuff like some of the Wolverine stuff, I mean, I know part of the reason, Marvel asked me, can you draw like these Wolverine or these X-Men covers or whatever, is there's still the echo of what we did, 30 years ago. So I don't go out of my way to completely dismiss that stuff. I'm still doing it with my own current aesthetic. I'm still doing it with an eye towards some kind of visual impact or whatever. But it's definitely it is definitely informed by kind of some of the stuff that we did before. But hopefully
it's a great
in a fresh
combination.
way, or at least in an evolved way.
So I have to ask, Scott, even though you've done so many, I mean, probably in the thousands of pages over Wilson Jim, but you've got to ink other people too over the time.
Sure.
You did, I think you did some Neil Adams, didn't you?
I did a Batman Odyssey issue over Neil, which was again like huge honor that he asked, and he was always like one of my favorites. I'm an art collector, and Neil was always like one of the guys that I would try to like buy originals of, and study his work. And his ink line is still some of my favorite inks of all time. And if you actually go back to especially the last 2 or 3 years of his run on Ben Casey, his strip Ben Casey in the mid 60s, from about 65 and 66. That stuff's like got to be some of the best ink comics in the history of all comics. I mean, the variation in line work, and if you know me and my love of all things Klaus Janson, you can see there's some similarities there. I mean, there's a boldness, there's a no fear of heavy line weights with really delicate renderings right next to it. A spontaneous brush line, dry brush effects. I mean, he was throwing everything in the kitchen sink at his approach to doing lines, and so that stuff made a huge impression on me. So being able to ink him on the Batman was a thrill. I've had some of the best jobs some of the ones I've enjoyed the most are ones that I'm not really thought of as being kind of associated with. So I did an issue of X-Men with John Romita Jr., and that's a completely different style.
Oh, I love looking at that.
Than a lot of stuff.
I had to follow you on that one too, by the way, Scott.
Oh, did you?
Yeah.
Oh, really? That's funny. Yeah, that was right in my wheelhouse.
I love how it looked
from a change. It allowed me a kind of a real kind of change of pace. But you can still, I still look at it. I can still tell that I inked it, but
very much so.
But the approach still felt kind of new and fresh.
Well, yeah, he uses a lot of side of the pencil, and some inkers will look at that stuff and they'll either make it all black or they'll try to hatch that. And if you aren't comfortable with drawing and you're trying to ink the side of a pencil that kind of drifts off, you're in for a little bit of an awakening. So
well, I always felt like guys like him use their pencil. And Neil Adams did the same thing. They used their tools. They allowed their tools to make the types of markings and ciphers and lines that the tool was designed to make. And I always thought that was true for inkers as well. So if you're going to use a brush, use a brush in a way that is to its advantage. I mean, don't be afraid to use the fat side edge of the brush. It doesn't always have to be this beautiful, delicate, thin to thick to thin, wispy brush line that I think is kind of, in a lot of ways, their brains, that's what they think a brush line looks like. No, it can be dry. It can be super bold. And I've always felt like using crow quills or brushes, or there is a way that those tools make a line that is the way that they were designed to work. And I always tried to use that to my advantage. So all the line work that you see from brushes and crow quills and any tools in between, it's in and of of the specifics of that type of tool, and I try to use that to my advantage.
Yeah, no,
And I think
I've been studying it for years. I've seen it. So
yeah.
yeah.
I'm trying to think who else. I mean, I inked a bunch of stuff over Mark Silvestri, and Mark is probably one of the best artists in the history of comics. I just really can't think of anybody whose drawing skills, rival Mark's.
I remember I inked a Cyberforce issue once again after you inked it, and I remember getting those pages in, and just I'd inked a lot of X-Men stuff,
Yeah.
and seeing that, it was just like that was an overload of line work and and it was just beautifully drawn.
And he leaves a lot for the inker to try to kind of figure it out. And
yeah,
you got to bring your drawing skills.
Yeah, I remember obviously he was very influenced by what you guys were doing, because it went from him working on Wolverine and X-Men prior to that with Dan Green inking him.
Right.
And I'd seen the work in the Marvel offices, back then. And then he was like, "Oh, well, we're doing this now." And he just jumped right in to the fold. It was,
that was just for a couple of years, and then his stuff again kind of continued to evolve. And in some ways, he's doing like the best work he's ever done now. So it just goes to show that you could be old and grizzled and still just kick ass.
Yeah. Well, old, grizzled, tall, and handsome for that guy.
Yeah, no kidding, right?
He's definitely has kind of a rock star sort of life.
Yeah, and he hate me for saying this. The only thing I regret is that he doesn't draw more, because
I know
the world needs more Mark Silvestri drawings. I think we got to agree on that.
I always feel, I'm like, I wish he didn't start Top Cow, because then he'd be doing it like a monthly or semi-monthly work, and you get to see it all the time.
He doesn't even have to do a monthly. He just needs to. I just want him to draw more, but he's living his life.
I'm sure he is. I'm sure he's somewhere smiling right now. Yeah. Well, Scott, it's been an hour. Probably should wrap it up and let you get on with your life. You probably have 1,400 pages to work on at this point.
You're not drawing anything. I had kind of assumed that you'd be drawing while we were chatting.
I'm trying to pay attention and glean as much as I can. So if I was drawing, I don't know. Jeff has been handling the chores on Drink and Draw for the last couple episodes, and now I'm starting to get spoiled, because I'd be drawing.
You can concentrate on either listening to what someone's saying or doing your drawing, but you don't have to like.
Yeah, but I'd be manning the cameras too,
right,
and trying to put comments up and do different things, but still draw. And this I was like, okay, I'm just going to listen and take this in, because I've known you for, I guess, close to 30 years, and I see you at conventions, but I've never had a chance to pick your brain and hear what goes on, and it's been wonderful.
There's not much in there other than my love of comics. It's pretty empty up there.
Yeah, so it's been a real treat for me. I appreciate it. This is a nice COVID treat for me.
Well, thank you, and I really do. I said it before. I really do appreciate getting to be sort of your guest on the inaugural show. It's an honor, and I love talking about this stuff. So really do appreciate you inviting me, and we'll have to do it again sometime.
I'd love to do it again anytime, Scott. Maybe we could both kind of draw or ink or something while we're doing this, and
or at least drink.
Yeah, or at least drink. It is Drink and Draw. Well, thanks, Scott. I appreciate it. I'm gonna end it here. And
right.
Your Twitter is what?
I don't know.
I'm gonna find it right now. Oh, it's at @ScottW_inks.
Yeah, who came up with that? A couple times I've thought about. I need to change that. That's a lousy.
I don't even know if you can.
Lousy branding. Who did that? Oh, that was me. Oh well.
Yeah.
That was me deciding. Oh, you know what? I should probably enter the world of social media, because it seems to be where all the cool kids hang out, and without really understanding, you should probably be a little clearer in your description of what your address is, what your name is.
Meanwhile, Scott, as one of the guys put up here, he said influence a decade of inkers, but I think it's more than that. And I don't think you really need social media. Everybody knows who you are in this business. Everybody knows what you've accomplished and done, and what you guys brought to the table. So you could have somebody else's name, and then people would manage to find you.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Those are kind words.
Well, on that note, cheers, everybody. Hopefully, I'll have some great guests, or to follow Scott. But Scott's been one of my favorite artists since as long as I can remember, since as long as I've been doing comics. So I've been thrilled. Thanks for joining us, everybody.
Thanks,
Cheers.
guys. Appreciate it.
Bye. There we go.